everyone, Nadine Briggs here from Simply Social Kids. Today I want to talk to you about when kids don't speak up when they're expected to speak up. Some parents just think they can just say, speak up, and that's going to help them to do better with that particular struggle, but that doesn't generally work. So I want to give you some tips in terms of why that doesn't work, and also some tips for how maybe you can help out with that particular situation. So one of the things I did want to mention, though, is that obviously this is really based in anxiety, maybe some extreme shyness. And so there's more going on than them just having an unwillingness to talk. It's more that there's anxiety and there's things that are going on that are getting those words just stuck in their throat. And we have quite a few kids that we work with who have this particular struggle. And it's a challenging thing for a lot of families. You can certainly understand the social pressure that parents feel if they're with relatives, or maybe they run into some friend at the mall and their child isn't acting in the socially appropriate way of saying hello to Mrs. Whoever that they might have met at the mall. And it can feel like their kids are having bad manners and that they were going to be viewed as bad parents. And there's just a lot of social pressure for all of them, for the whole family when that happens. And so it can be really challenging for families. And so you can understand certainly why a parent might just say, hey, speak up. When someone just talks to you, talk to them, just trying to demand that it happen. Unfortunately, that, like I said, that does not work. Just like when people say to other people who are worried, oh, don't worry, it's fine, don't worry. It doesn't usually work either. Because at that point, you're really just relying on willpower. And if you've ever made a New Year's resolution, you probably understand how willpower really works or doesn't work in a lot of situations. So that's not going to be a very effective approach. So we're going to give you some steps to cope and some approaches that might help with this situation. But I did want to say, too, that if this is a struggle for your child, that you really should seek a counselor who is qualified to deal with people who have this challenge. Kids whose words get stuck like that and they're not able to communicate are not going to do well necessarily in talk therapy. So you might need to find somebody who's a play therapist or another type of therapist that can get at the issues and try to help with the anxiety that's happening here, because it can be a really significant issue. The other thing too is when we just say to people, oh, just speak up, we're also not acknowledging the depth of the issue and the kind of the complexities of what might be going on with that particular individual. So again, I would seek therapy in addition to maybe trying some of the strategies that we have here today, just so that they get all the help that they need to overcome this. Okay, so one of the steps I wanted to give you was really understanding kind of what's going on in the brain. We've talked about this probably in other blogs. I talk to kids about this all the time. I think it's really important to understand really basic neuroscience of what's happening when you're anxious, because I think once you have an understanding of that, then you might feel more in control because you know what's going on in terms of the mechanics of your brain. So the way that we describe it is in as very elementary terms as we can, is that you have the prefrontal cortex, which is the area right behind your forehead. And then you have another part of your brain, and that's like what the prefrontal cortex is, your logical center. Then you have in the middle of your brain, like a little spot that's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is where you handle all of your worries. So that's where you have like a flight, fight, or freeze reaction to what's happening. So it's a real primitive part of your brain, and that's where your thoughts go if you're having really anxiety, a lot of anxious moment, anxiety attack, those types of things. It all gets handled by the amygdala, sometimes called an amygdala hijack when that happens. So what we want kids to understand is, how do you prevent those thoughts from going into the amygdala where you don't have logic and reasoning? And how can you keep them into this prefrontal cortex where you do have logic and reasoning? Because you want to be able to solve whatever problem you have at hand. And if you've lost your logic and reasoning, you're not able to problem solve. And so I think just knowing that about your brain and knowing that you want to pop the thought back over to that more logical center of your brain can be really empowering and helpful for kids. So that's just literally step one, is understanding what's going on in my head. Because if you think about it intellectually rather than emotionally, I think you can feel more in control, because anxiety can be a big, scary emotion for lots of people. So the second thing I wanted to mention was anxiety is a future emotion. And understanding that is an important aspect as well. And so the reason it's important is because we start to hear in our heads triggers that are, or words that trigger us to understand, oh, this is anxiety that I'm dealing with right now. So one of them is a what if, the term what if. So if you're thinking about something, your child's thinking about something, and they're coming up with all of these what if scenarios, then that's a signal that, okay, I'm having an anxious thought right now, and I need to flip the script on that. I need to turn it into something that's more of a coping thought. So turning a what if into like a what is, or an even better, I can. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, well, what if such and such happened? Oh, well, then I can respond this way and do this and have a coping mechanism. Right away, I know what I'm supposed to do. That's one way to help manage that, is to identify it by using those terms, what if, and then follow up with a coping strategy for how to deal with that what if thought. Another thing that we'll do, and I'll show a picture at the end of this video, is create an I can. So just to take a recycled can of some sort, I happen to use a Crystal Light can that comes with the little strips of packets of powder in them. I just decorate that with paper, or bedazzle it however you want to, and just put I can on the can. And so when something happens, your child has a what if thought about something, you counteract that with an I can thought. Well, if this happens, I can, and then you write it down on a piece of paper and put that in the can. And over time, you'll have this can that's just filled with all these coping strategies for the different worries that your child has. And they can go through that and say, oh, wow, look at all these solutions I have to my what if thoughts. And so that's just like more of a tangible way. And it was kind of a fun little craft, pretty easy craft to be able to do, to have really coping strategies kind of at your fingertips. Another strategy is to really counteract the anxiety in terms of keeping it into this prefrontal cortex. And this is a really common strategy. You might have seen this lots of times if you study up how to help kids with anxiety. You might have seen this one in numerous ways. It's a cognitive behavioral strategy, cognitive behavioral strategies. So that's why it's pretty popular. It's popular because it works really well. And what you would do is just imagine 3 columns. You can even write 3 columns on a piece of paper. You're going to write down, what is the best case scenario if my what if scenario happens? What is the worst case scenario? What is that going to look like if my what if scenario happens? And then what is really the most likely outcome? What's the most likely outcome, so that they can rethink, how worried do I really need to be about this? So one of the ones that we'll do is we'll talk about bees. There are a lot of kids who are worried about getting stung by a bee. Here comes the warmer weather. They're going to be really worried about bees. They might spend a significant amount of time being worried about bees. You might even have kids who are afraid to go outside because they're worried about bees. So we want to say, what is the best case scenario? Well, you don't get stung by a bee. What's the worst case scenario? You get stung by a bee. It hurts for a little bit. And you put a little that paste on it with the powder, and makes it feel better, and it goes away. And the most likely outcome is you might have a bee sting. Most likely outcome is you're not going to get stung by a bee. But if you do get stung by a bee, it's going to be something that you can manage. It may be unpleasant. You might not like it for a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. You can manage it. It's just going to be a little bit uncomfortable for a while. So we want to think about it that way, so that they're understanding this is not something we should be spending every waking moment in the summer worrying about because of the likely or unlikeliness of it about to happen. The last piece that I wanted to share with you is something that you may not have heard of before, but I think it's really, really important. And that is that not only do we need to get rid of whatever might be going poorly or badly in our lives, but we also need to make a concerted effort to increase the good. So to have that life balance is really, really important. And a lot of people don't think about that. They think, oh, something's wrong in my life, I'm gonna get rid of the bad thing, and therefore happiness will come. And that's not necessarily the case. So if you think about, like, let's say you have a bully in your life, and the bully is obviously causing you a lot of angst and discomfort and upset and all of that. And the bully might have even taken all of your friends, like your friend group just went to the bully. That would be horrible, right? That would make you really unhappy. So let's say you're able to get rid of the bully. You're able to manage the bully and control the bullying situation. Awesome, you got rid of your bully. Is that necessarily going to make you happy in that particular scenario? Well, not necessarily, because the outcome of having that bully meant that all of these people who you thought were your friends kind of went to that bully on a whim, which would be really terrible. So I would say that the way to kind of counteract that, like, certainly get rid of the bully, but also seek out people in your life who would be there for you and not leave you at the whim of a bully. So increase your friend group, or change out your friend group so that you have more solid friendships and people who are truer to you and kind of have your back more than the people who would have gone to the bully. That would be one way to counteract that and to increase the good, in addition to getting rid of the bad. So I hope you found these tips useful. If you did, please hit the like button, leave me a comment, and hit subscribe if you want to hear more from us, and we'll see you next time.